On a cold Christmas Eve, a family was torn apart, sold to different masters and scattered across the land. The cruelty of their separation seemed absolute, a punishment meant to crush hope and erase love. But one woman, bound by blood and unyielding determination, refused to accept their fate. Fueled by grief, rage, and an unbreakable resolve, she orchestrated a plan that would shock the world. A plan to reunite her family at any cost, even if it meant taking revenge on every master responsible for their suffering. This is the story of a Christmas turned into a reckoning, where love, justice, and vengeance collided in a way that history would never forget. The night was unusually cold, with a sharp wind slicing through the narrow streets and alleys of the town, carrying with it the distant sounds of carolers, their voices mingling with the howling of the winter gusts. It was Christmas Eve, a time when most families would gather by the hearth, sharing warmth, laughter, and the faint scent of roasted meats and spiced wine. But for one family, this night would not bring comfort, joy, or the faintest whisper of peace. Instead, it would become the darkest memory etched into their lives, a night of unbearable cruelty and irreversible loss. In a small, dimly lit home on the outskirts of the plantation, they had gathered for what they believed would be a quiet celebration, unaware that their lives were about to be shattered in a way so profound that even the strongest hearts might break under the weight of grief. The woman of the house, young yet carrying the strength of generations, had prepared a simple meal, setting it carefully on a wooden table scarred with years of use. Her husband, weary from labor but proud of what little comfort he could provide, sat quietly beside her, trying to summon a smile for their children, who played nearby with makeshift toys fashioned from scraps of cloth and wood. There was laughter, faint and fragile, punctuated by the occasional cry of an infant or the soft whispers of siblings sharing secrets. In those fleeting moments, hope seemed tangible, a delicate flame flickering against the encroaching darkness of a world that often seemed indifferent to their suffering. Outside, the night air was thick with anticipation, though not the kind that comes from joy or celebration. There was a tension, a subtle, almost imperceptible unease that made the woman glance nervously toward the door from time to time. She could not place it at first, but something in the way the shadows moved, stretching longer than they should, made her heart tight. Her instincts, honed by years of surviving in a world that demanded vigilance, whispered warnings she could not ignore. And then the sound came. The heavy, deliberate footsteps that echoed across the wooden floorboards, each step a harbinger of the horror to come. Before she could fully comprehend what was happening, the door burst open and men, stern-faced and armed, filled the threshold. They were the masters and overseers, their expressions void of mercy, their intentions clear and cruel. The children cried out, clutching at their mother's skirts, while the husband rose to protect them. But the men were relentless, their strength overwhelming. They moved swiftly, separating the family, tearing the bonds that had held them together through years of hardship and struggle. The woman screamed, a sound born of both terror and disbelief, as her children were dragged from her arms, each one disappearing into the shadows, destined for a fate unknown, yet certain to be filled with suffering. Her husband was seized and thrown aside, his shouts drowned by the cold, merciless laughter of the men who had come to enforce the will of those who held power over life and death. Every detail of the moment etched itself into her memory, the scent of the winter air mixing with the faint aroma of the meal she had prepared, the harsh cries of her children, the cold steel of the hands that gripped her arms, and the deafening silence that followed when they left. Taking pieces of her heart with them, she was left alone in the half-lit room, the remnants of what should have been a warm, joyous evening scattered around her: overturned chairs, broken plates, and the echo of laughter that now felt like a cruel mockery. Her mind raced, trying to comprehend the incomprehensible, struggling to make sense of the injustice inflicted upon them. How could such cruelty exist on a night meant for peace and reflection? How could those who claimed to uphold morality commit acts so vile that they shattered entire lives in a single, deliberate sweep? The cold seeped into her bones, but it was nothing compared to the emptiness that now occupied her heart. She sank to the floor, tears mingling with the dust and debris, feeling the weight of helplessness pressing down upon her. In those long, torturous hours, as the wind continued to howl outside and the distant sounds of celebration echoed mockingly, she vowed silently, fiercely, that she would not let this stand. The bond of family, the sacred tie that linked each of them to the others, could not be broken so easily, not if she could help it. She would find them, she resolved, no matter the cost, no matter the danger, no matter the darkness she would have to traverse to reclaim what had been stolen. Every moment spent alone on that cold floor hardened her resolve. She replayed the scene repeatedly in her mind, analyzing the movements of their captors, the timing, the patterns, and even the weaknesses she could exploit. Every tear shed became fuel for determination, every sob a reminder of the urgency of her mission. In the days that followed, she would walk through the town with a measured calm, masking the storm that raged within her, observing the movements of those who had orchestrated this cruelty, and gathering the fragments of information that might one day allow her to reunite her family. She learned to move silently, to speak cautiously, to blend into shadows, all the while keeping the image of her children and husband vividly in her mind, refusing to let despair consume her entirely. Each night she would return to that empty home, now nothing more than a shell of memories, and whisper promises into the cold air, swearing that they would be together again, that no master's cruelty would ultimately prevail. It was on that Christmas Eve, a night meant for joy, that the foundation for her relentless pursuit of justice and vengeance was laid. The injustice inflicted upon her family ignited a fire that would not be extinguished, a fire that would guide every step she took in the days, months, and years to come. It was a separation that was meant to break her, to reduce her to despair, but instead it became the spark that forged her into someone capable of extraordinary resolve. Every memory of that night, every detail of the fear and suffering became a map for the path she would take, a path driven by love, by rage, and by the unyielding desire to see her family whole again. The cold of that Christmas Eve would remain with her forever, a reminder of both the cruelty humans could inflict and the indomitable strength that one person could summon when driven by a cause greater than themselves. After the brutal separation on that fateful Christmas Eve, the woman was left in a state of shock and despair, but amid the chaos, a single unyielding thought consumed her. Her family had been destroyed before her eyes, and she had been powerless to stop it. The magnitude of the loss pressed down on her with every heartbeat, yet beneath the crushing weight of grief a spark of resolve began to glow. She would not allow the forces that had torn her loved ones apart to claim victory over her spirit. The children she had cradled in her arms, their laughter now replaced by distant cries and fear, became the center of her focus. Every tear shed by them, every scream that echoed in the corridors of her memory, transformed into a sharp, piercing drive that refused to be silent. She wandered through the empty rooms of her home, now cold and hollow, recalling the sound of each child's voice, the way her husband would hold them close, the small routines that had defined their life together. These recollections, painful as they were, became her compass. She realized that the only way to endure the horror inflicted upon them was to channel her grief into action, to transform despair into something purposeful and unrelenting. Each day following the separation was a calculated exercise in survival and observation. The woman moved through her surroundings with a heightened awareness, learning the habits and patterns of those responsible for her family's suffering. She watched as the masters went about their lives, their arrogance and indifference laying bare the vulnerability of their position. They believed themselves untouchable, yet every careless word, every routine action, became a piece of the puzzle she was assembling in her mind. She meticulously catalogued details, the timing of their travels, the guards who accompanied them, the weaknesses in their routines that could be exploited. She began to understand the landscape of power she was up against, recognizing that intelligence and strategy would be as critical as courage in what lay ahead. Her nights were sleepless, spent planning, imagining and rehearsing every possible scenario. The pain of separation haunted her, manifesting in dreams where she reached for her children only to grasp emptiness, or where her husband's face would vanish before her eyes. Yet within these nightmares, she found clarity. Each vision sharpened her resolve, revealing the paths she would need to take, the risks she would have to endure, and the sacrifices she would have to make to reclaim her family. She understood that vengeance alone would not suffice. It had to be precise, calculated, and absolute, aimed at dismantling the power structures that allowed such cruelty to thrive. In the marketplace, and along the roads, she listened carefully to conversations, noting the mentions of plantations, the sale of slaves, and the movements of her family members. Each scrap of information, no matter how trivial it seemed, became a clue. She questioned travelers cautiously, engaged in casual exchanges that masked her true intentions, and learned to mask her presence in ways that would have seemed impossible to anyone who underestimated her determination. Her very demeanor became a tool, blending sorrow with apparent submission, hiding the storm of strategy and vengeance that churned beneath the surface. She was patient, understanding that haste could ruin everything. Each delay, each moment of careful observation, brought her closer to understanding the full scope of what had been done to her family. The emotional toll was immense. There were moments when the loneliness pressed in from all sides, when the absence of her loved ones created a void that seemed impossible to fill, yet she refused to allow despair to take hold. Instead, she converted her anguish into vigilance. She learned to read the subtleties in human behavior, the twitch of an eye, the falter in a step, the tension in a voice, that hinted at vulnerability or opportunity. Her grief became a lens through which she could see the weaknesses of those who had caused her suffering, transforming her emotional pain into tactical insight. Every encounter with the world became an opportunity to gather intelligence. She watched the flow of goods and information, tracked the comings and goings of the overseers, and memorized the landscape of the plantations where her family had been sent. She built mental maps of each location, noting the presence of guards, the timing of patrols, and the geography that could aid or hinder her movements. Each step she took was measured and deliberate, each decision made with the potential consequences in mind. Her mind became a fortress of calculation and determination, fortified by the singular goal of reuniting her family and delivering justice to those who had destroyed it. Amidst this meticulous planning, her thoughts never strayed from her children and husband. She imagined their lives under the control of strangers, the suffering and deprivation they endured, and the longing they must feel for one another. These imaginings were not merely acts of memory or sorrow, they were few. Each imagined hardship became a call to action, a reminder of the stakes, and a reinforcement of the necessity of her mission. She envisioned the moment when they would be reunited, and in doing so she reinforced her own resolve, holding on to the vision of her family as a guiding light through the darkness of her current existence. Her strategy began to take shape not only as a response to the past, but also as a plan for the future. She realized that her actions had to be decisive, that hesitation could result in permanent loss. She studied the routines of the masters and overseers, understanding their strengths and exploiting their blind spots. She cultivated patience, learning when to observe and when to act, recognizing that the path to reunion would require both cunning and courage. Each small victory, an overheard conversation, a discovered routine, a moment of insight, added to her growing confidence that she could succeed, that she could overturn the injustice that had been inflicted upon her family. The combination of grief, love, and resolve transformed her into a figure of extraordinary determination. She became attuned to the smallest details, sensitive to the slightest shifts in circumstance, and capable of responding with precision and intent. The memory of her family, the injustice done to them, and the hope of reunion became the driving forces behind every action, every decision, and every thought. She understood that the journey ahead would be fraught with danger, that each step carried the potential for discovery or failure, yet she faced these risks with unwavering focus, knowing that the alternative, living without her family, was unacceptable. Through this crucible of suffering, she emerged as someone who would not simply survive, but someone who would act with the singular purpose of restoring what had been taken from her. The cruelty she had witnessed on that Christmas Eve had set her on a path of relentless pursuit, a journey defined by love, vengeance, and an unshakable determination to reunite her family at any cost. Her mind and spirit were forged in the fires of grief, honed by observation and strategy, and fortified by the unbreakable bonds of family that no master's cruelty could sever. The woman's vow to seek revenge against every master involved in the separation of her family was no fleeting thought or idle fantasy. It became the central focus of her existence. From the moment she had been left alone in the aftermath of that Christmas Eve, her mind had begun to chart a path of retribution, a path that would demand courage, cunning, and an unwavering commitment to justice. As she understood the intensity of her emotions, grief, anger, and a fierce determination coalesced into a force that propelled her forward, refusing to allow despair to root her in helplessness. Every memory of the scene, every fragment of terror etched into her mind, became a vivid illustration of the cruelty she was determined to punish. The cries of her children, the helpless pleading of her husband, the cold indifference in the eyes of the masters, all of it was seared into her consciousness, a constant reminder of the debt owed. She understood that revenge was not merely a matter of physical retaliation. It required strategy, patience, and a careful understanding of her adversary. The masters who had torn her family apart were individuals accustomed to wielding power without consequence, and to confront them successfully, she needed more than rage. She needed intellect, precision, and the ability to manipulate circumstances to her advantage. In the weeks following the separation, she began to observe the lives of those who had inflicted such suffering. She studied their habits, learning the rhythms of their daily routines, the movements of their guards, and the times when they were most vulnerable. She noticed the arrogance with which they carried themselves, their assumption that cruelty could exist without consequence, and she understood that this very hubris would become a weakness she could exploit. Every casual word they spoke, every careless glance, and every predictable action became data she stored meticulously in her mind, piecing together a mental map of opportunity. She became adept at moving unnoticed, at blending into the shadows, and at feigning submission when necessary, all the while allowing her enemies to reveal themselves and their vulnerabilities. The emotional toll of this pursuit was immense, yet it became inseparable from her determination. The woman recognized that to avenge her family, she could not afford to be consumed solely by anger. She needed clarity of thought and an unwavering sense of purpose. Her grief was transformed into a tool, sharpening her awareness and heightening her senses, allowing her to notice details others overlooked. She could track the faintest variations in behavior, detect hesitation or overconfidence, and anticipate actions before they were taken.
It was this combination of emotional intensity and mental acuity that began to shape her into someone capable of confronting the very men who had believed themselves untouchable. As her plan took shape, she began to consider the methods by which she could exact her revenge. She knew that brute force alone would not suffice. The masters were protected by guards entrenched in their positions of authority, and surrounded by people loyal to their power. To succeed, she would need to exploit both physical and psychological vulnerability. She began to craft scenarios, imagining how she could isolate each target, what tools or strategies she might employ, and how she could ensure that each act served a greater purpose in her overarching goal of reuniting her family. Her imagination became a laboratory for strategy, where every possibility was explored, every risk evaluated and every contingency planned for. Her days were consumed with reconnaissance. She traveled quietly through the lands where her family had been sent, seeking clues, gathering information and learning the exact locations and routines of the masters who had benefited from the separation. She engaged in careful questioning of those who might unknowingly provide insight, always masking her true intentions behind the facade of a vulnerable woman navigating a world that underestimated her. She became adept at interpreting the smallest gestures, the shifts in tone, the subtleties that betrayed hidden truth. Through this painstaking effort, she gradually constructed a comprehensive understanding of the network that had torn her family apart, recognizing the connections between masters, overseers and intermediaries who had facilitated the cruelty. The moral weight of her decision to pursue revenge was not lost on her. She was acutely aware of the enormity of the task she had undertaken, and the potential consequences of failure. Yet she justified her resolve with the belief that those who had inflicted such suffering on innocent lives could not be allowed to continue unchallenged. Her actions were fueled not merely by personal vengeance, but by a sense of justice for the family she loved, a justice denied them by the indifferent cruelty of those in power. In this way, her pursuit became both a deeply personal mission and a broader statement against the system that allowed such separations to occur. Her preparation extended beyond observation and planning. She honed her own physical and mental abilities, understanding that strength, agility and endurance would be necessary to confront her adversary. She trained herself in silence, in movement and in resilience, cultivating a presence that combined patience with intensity. Each day of preparation reinforced her commitment, building the confidence she would need to confront the masters, and ensure that every act of retribution was deliberate and effective. She learned to anticipate, not only the actions of her enemies but also their reactions to unexpected events, preparing herself for contingencies that could arise in moments of high tension or confrontation. As her plan matured, she began to feel the weight of inevitability settle over her. Each master represented not merely a target for revenge but a symbol of the injustice that had been inflicted upon her family. She visualized the sequence in which she would act, prioritizing those whose cruelty had caused the most suffering and those whose removal would create openings for her to reunite her loved ones. She considered the ripple effects of each action, aware that the elimination of one master could disrupt the networks of others, and she factored these dynamics into her strategy. Her mind became a lattice of cause and effect, a complex web of potential outcomes and calculated risks, all guided by the singular objective of restoring her family. Her emotional landscape remained intense, a blend of grief, anger and love, each driving her toward action. Yet within this intensity she maintained a clarity of purpose that allowed her to navigate the dangers she faced. She recognized that the road ahead would be fraught with peril, that each step carried the possibility of discovery or failure, but she confronted these realities with unwavering determination. The memory of her children, the image of her husband's protective embrace, and the injustice of their separation became the constant fuel that propelled her forward, turning despair into strategy, sorrow into resolve, and anger into precise, calculated action. Through these months of preparation and observation, she transformed from a grieving woman into a force capable of confronting and dismantling the very individuals who had inflicted suffering upon her family. Every act, every decision, every thought was aligned with the ultimate goal: to avenge the injustice, to reclaim her family, and to ensure that those who had believed themselves untouchable would face the consequences of their cruelty. In this transformation, the woman became a figure of relentless determination, a testament to the power of love, grief and the human capacity for strategic action when fueled by necessity and moral conviction.
With her plan for vengeance taking shape, the woman understood that careful, deliberate execution would be essential if she hoped to succeed. She could no longer act impulsively, for any misstep could result not only in failure but in the permanent loss of her family and the destruction of the opportunity to reclaim them. Every master she intended to confront represented a potential trap, a well-protected target whose arrogance and sense of invulnerability could turn lethal in a moment. She realized that she would need to study each individual with the same precision a hunter uses when stalking prey, noting habits, routines, and vulnerabilities with meticulous attention. Each observation, each piece of intelligence gathered became a building block in the structure of her strategy, a step toward the ultimate goal of reunification. Her mind, sharpened by grief and sharpened further by determination, worked ceaselessly, analyzing possibilities, projecting outcomes, and rehearsing courses of action again and again until the paths forward became almost second nature. In the quiet hours of dawn, she would watch the movements of those who had torn her family apart, noting the paths they took, the times of day when they were least alert, and the distractions that allowed for brief moments of vulnerability. She memorized the locations of their homes, their guards, and the surrounding terrain, turning every detail into a potential advantage. Nothing escaped her notice: the placement of windows and doors, the way light and shadow fell across courtyards, the patterns of their servants, and even the subtle differences in the tone of voice or the rhythm of footsteps. Every nuance of behavior became a clue, every weakness a possible opening for action. She knew that in order to confront these men successfully, she would have to move like a shadow, striking only when conditions were most favorable and leaving no trace of her presence that could lead to discovery. Her preparations extended beyond observation. She began to anticipate the psychological dimension of her task, understanding that fear and uncertainty could be as powerful as physical action. She considered how the masters might react to threats, how their pride might cloud judgment, and how she could exploit their assumptions of control and dominance. She imagined scenarios in which they underestimated her, dismissed her grief as weakness, or overlooked the determination burning behind her eyes. Each scenario was rehearsed mentally, the outcomes considered, adjusted, and refined until she could envision with near certainty the steps required to neutralize each individual. In this way, her intellect became as important a weapon as her courage, allowing her to approach the task with a combination of precision and strategy that her enemies would never anticipate. The emotional intensity driving her actions remained a constant companion. She was propelled forward by the memory of her family, by the anguish of their separation, and by the knowledge that time was not on her side. The longer they remained under the control of those who had torn them apart, the greater the risk that they would be permanently lost. This urgency sharpened her focus, compelling her to act decisively even as she exercised extreme caution. She drew on every memory of love, every recollection of shared moments, and every imagined reunion to sustain her through the long hours of preparation, using grief as fuel and transforming it into a relentless drive toward action. She began to cultivate practical skills that would be essential for carrying out her plan. She trained herself in stealth, learning to move without sound, to blend into shadows, and to exploit the natural environment to her advantage. She developed patience and timing, recognizing that the success of her mission depended on waiting for the precise moment when her enemies were most vulnerable. Her body, conditioned by hardship and necessity, became an instrument of purpose, responsive to every command of her mind and attuned to the demands of the challenges she would face. Every movement was deliberate, every action calculated, and every decision guided by the overarching objective of reuniting her family and exacting justice for the suffering inflicted upon them. The social dimension of her plan also required attention. She had to navigate a world in which alliances, loyalties, and assumptions could work against her. She engaged cautiously with neighbors, travelers, and intermediaries, posing questions that appeared innocuous while secretly gathering information crucial to her task. She learned to mask her intentions, to present a facade of vulnerability that concealed the relentless intelligence and determination driving her. In every interaction, she probed for insight, seeking the tiniest cracks in the armor of those who had harmed her family, and using every observation to refine the strategy she would eventually put into motion. Despite the intensity of her focus, there were moments of overwhelming emotion that threatened to derail her concentration. She would recall the last time she had held her children, the sound of their laughter, the warmth of her husband's embrace, and the cold cruelty with which they had been taken from her. These memories were both a torment and a motivator, reminding her of the stakes and reinforcing the necessity of her actions. She learned to channel these emotions, converting sorrow into vigilance, despair into determination, and fear into calculated courage. In doing so, she transformed herself into a figure capable of navigating danger, anticipating opposition, and striking with precision. As her understanding of the masters' lives deepened, she began to see patterns, predictable routines, overconfidence, and the complacency that often accompanies unchallenged authority. She noted which of them were most cruel, which were most distracted, and which might pose the greatest challenge. These assessments allowed her to prioritize targets, sequencing her actions in a way that maximized the likelihood of success and minimized risk to herself. Each detail was carefully weighed, each choice deliberate, as she constructed a roadmap for revenge that was both methodical and relentless. Her preparation was not purely physical or tactical, it was also moral and psychological. She understood that to pursue this course required an unflinching commitment to the principle that those who had torn her family apart must face consequence. She reconciled the enormity of the act she planned with the righteousness she perceived in defending her family, convincing herself that the pursuit of justice, even when it required extreme measures, was a necessary response to the cruelty inflicted upon them. This conviction became a shield against doubt and fear, reinforcing her resolve and sustaining her through the arduous journey that lay ahead. Throughout this period, the woman's vision of reunion remained vivid and unshakable. She imagined the moment when her family would be whole again, when the bonds severed by cruelty would be restored, and when the fear and suffering imposed upon them would be replaced by safety and love. This vision guided every action, informed every decision, and justified every risk. It became both the compass and the destination, a light that illuminated the path forward even in the darkest moment. By the time she felt ready to begin executing her plan, she had become a figure transformed by grief, sharpened by observation, and fortified by an unrelenting commitment to justice. Her mind was a repository of strategy, her body a tool honed for precision, and her heart a furnace of determination fueled by love and rage. Every step she had taken since that horrific Christmas Eve had been in preparation for the day when she would confront the masters, neutralize the obstacles, and reclaim what had been stolen from her. In this way, her meticulous preparation, strategic insight, and emotional resilience converged, setting the stage for a series of actions that would challenge the power and arrogance of those who believed themselves untouchable, and ultimately redefine what it meant to fight for family in a world governed by cruelty. The woman knew that executing her plan would require more than just knowledge and preparation. It would demand courage and precision in the face of danger. Every movement had to be deliberate, every decision calculated, because the masters she intended to confront were not just oppressors. They were men who wielded power, wealth, and influence, and who were protected by guards, dogs, and the rigid structures of authority. Any misstep could cost her everything, but she understood that hesitation would be equally fatal. The lives of her family depended on her ability to act with unwavering focus, to move silently through shadows, and to exploit every weakness without revealing her presence until the exact moment when she could strike. She had transformed her grief and anger into a discipline that was both physical and mental, preparing herself to confront the unimaginable risks that lay ahead. She began to study the terrain with meticulous care, learning the paths and routines that would allow her to move undetected. Every creek, fence, and wooded area became a potential ally in her pursuit. She memorized the timing of patrols, the patterns of overseers, and even the habits of the guards' animal. In this way, the landscape itself became an extension of her strategy, offering opportunities for concealment, surprise, and escape. She practiced moving silently over uneven ground, scaling fences and navigating narrow corridors, refining her movements until they became instinctive. This training was relentless and unforgiving, yet she welcomed it, knowing that mastery over her body and environment would be essential to her survival and the success of her mission. Observation was equally crucial. She watched from hidden vantage points, taking note of the masters' daily routines, their habits, and even their personal quirks. She learned which of them rose early, which lingered late, and which were most likely to be distracted by trivial concern. She listened for patterns in their conversations, noting how authority was asserted, and how fear or complacency could be manipulated. These observations allowed her to build a mental map of vulnerability, identifying the precise moments and circumstances in which her presence would go unnoticed, and her actions would have the greatest impact. Every detail, no matter how small, became a potential advantage, and she committed each to memory with painstaking care. Her approach was a blend of patience, timing, and calculated audacity. She learned when to wait, when to observe, and when to act, understanding that striking too early or too late could render all her preparation useless. She practiced mental rehearsals, imagining every possible scenario and visualizing her responses. Each imagined encounter was dissected and refined, with contingencies considered for resistance, pursuit, or unforeseen interference. This constant mental exercise made her movements deliberate and confident, instilling a quiet readiness that allowed her to act decisively when the moment arrived. The psychological aspect of her strategy became increasingly important. She recognized that fear, uncertainty, and the element of surprise could be as powerful as physical action. By projecting an air of calm or submission, she could lull her adversaries into complacency, masking the storm of intent that churned beneath her exterior. She studied their reactions to minor threats and disruptions, noting how easily arrogance and overconfidence could cloud judgment. Each small success in observation and manipulation reinforced her confidence, proving that her intellect and cunning could level the playing field against those who had believed themselves invincible. At the same time, the emotional weight of her mission continued to drive her. Memories of her children and husband, of the moment they were torn from her, and of the cries that haunted her nights, served as both torment and fuel. She drew strength from her grief,
channeling sorrow into vigilance, and love into strategy. Every step forward, every calculated risk, was informed by the image of her family and the determination that no master's cruelty could keep them apart. This fusion of emotion and intellect created a force of extraordinary resolve, a combination of precision and passion that guided her actions in every moment. She also began to experiment with methods of subtle intimidation and disruption. She understood that small targeted actions could create fear and confusion, weakening the master's sense of control without exposing herself to immediate danger. She considered the use of noise, shadow, misdirection and timing to unsettle her targets, each tactic rehearsed mentally until she could execute it with flawless precision. By manipulating the environment and exploiting vulnerabilities, she could approach the impossible goal of exacting revenge while maintaining the upper hand. Her discipline extended to her physical conditioning as well. She trained her body to endure long hours of stealthy movement, to react quickly and decisively when confronted, and to sustain strength under the stress of fatigue and cold. Every movement, from climbing fences to slipping through narrow passages, was refined through repeated practice until it became instinctual. This physical mastery complemented her mental preparation, allowing her to act with confidence, speed and accuracy when opportunity arose. She understood that hesitation could be fatal, and she was determined that her body would obey her mind without question when the moment of confrontation arrived. The logistical aspects of her plan were equally critical. She mapped routes for approach and retreat, identified safe locations to hide or regroup, and considered contingencies for discovery or pursuit. Every element of her surroundings was integrated into her strategy, from the layout of the master's homes to the movements of servants and guards. She anticipated potential interference from neighbors, travelers, or other outsiders, preparing for scenarios that could threaten her mission. In this way, her plan became a comprehensive system of action, where every step, every movement, and every decision was part of a larger interconnected strategy designed to maximize the likelihood of success and minimize risk. Her resolve was tested repeatedly by the enormity of what she intended to do. She confronted the reality that each act of vengeance carried immense danger, not only to herself but also to the possibility of reuniting her family. Yet she faced these risks with unwavering determination, convinced that the cost of inaction far exceeded the dangers inherent in her action. She internalized the understanding that courage was not the absence of fear but the mastery of it, and that precision, patience, and strategy could transform fear into a tool rather than a hindrance. As she moved closer to the execution of her plan, she became increasingly attuned to the psychological states of her targets. She observed their arrogance, their complacency, and their assumptions of control, recognizing that these traits could be exploited. Each master represented not merely an individual to be confronted, but a symbol of the system that had enabled the separation of her family. By striking decisively, she would not only reclaim what was stolen but also send a message to those who wielded power without conscience, demonstrating that even the most entrenched authority could be challenged by intelligence, courage, and unwavering resolve. Through weeks of observation, training, and mental rehearsal, the woman transformed into someone capable of confronting overwhelming odds. Her grief had become a weapon, her love a compass, and her intellect a guide. Every detail she had learned, every weakness she had identified, and every strategy she had refined, converged in preparation for the moment when she would act. She understood that the stakes were nothing less than the restoration of her family and the retribution for the cruelty they had endured. Her mind, body, and spirit had been honed into instruments of purpose, each element aligned toward the singular goal of reuniting her loved ones and confronting those who had dared to tear them apart. The woman's plan had been carefully constructed over weeks of observation, preparation, and relentless mental calculation, yet she knew that planning alone was insufficient. Execution demanded precision, courage, and the ability to adapt to unforeseen circumstances. She understood that confronting the masters responsible for her family's suffering would not be simple. They were men accustomed to control, protected by wealth, guards, and social power. To succeed, she would have to strike with both cunning and audacity, exploiting weaknesses they did not realize existed while ensuring that each step of her actions advanced her ultimate goal. Every detail mattered, every moment of hesitation could be fatal, and yet she approached the challenge with a clarity born of necessity and unyielding love for her family. Her first task was to establish proximity to her targets without drawing attention. She moved through the shadows, becoming an observer in the lives of the very men whose arrogance had shattered her world. She memorized the layout of their homes, the placement of doors and windows, the timing of guards' patrols, and even the patterns of light and shadow that changed with the sun. Each piece of information was stored carefully in her mind, a vital component of the larger plan. She learned the habits and vulnerabilities of each master, noting when they were most likely to be distracted, when their attention lapsed, and how overconfidence blinded them to potential threat. In these observations, She found both strategy and patience, recognizing that success required careful timing and a thorough understanding of each adversary. Her preparation extended to the psychological dimension of her mission. She understood that fear, uncertainty, and the element of surprise were powerful tools. The masters she confronted had long relied on intimidation to maintain control, yet she recognized that their own complacency could be exploited. By moving silently, striking unexpectedly, and creating moments of confusion, she could disrupt their sense of invulnerability and weaken their ability to respond effectively. She envisioned the precise ways in which their routines could be manipulated, the small actions that could create maximal impact, and the timing that would allow her to achieve her objectives while remaining undetected. Every scenario was rehearsed mentally, every contingency considered, and every potential response anticipated. Physical readiness was equally essential. She honed her body to endure long periods of stealth and exertion, to react instantly when confronted, and to navigate both natural and built environments with agility and precision. Every movement, from scaling fences to slipping through narrow corridors, was practiced until it became instinctual. She trained herself to move without sound, to anticipate obstacles, and to exploit opportunities in ways that appeared effortless to the untrained eye. Her endurance, reflexes, and spatial awareness were all sharpened through rigorous repetition, ensuring that when the moment to act arrived, she could rely on both body and mind in perfect coordination. Despite the intense focus required, the emotional weight of her mission never lessened. She constantly revisited the memory of her family, recalling the day they were torn apart and the anguish that had followed. These memories, though painful, were transformed into fuel, providing clarity, motivation, and an unshakable sense of purpose. Every step she took, every calculated risk she assessed, was informed by the desire to reunite her loved ones, and to confront those who had caused irreparable harm. Her grief, anger, and love became intertwined forces, driving her with a relentlessness that no external obstacle could diminish. She also studied the social environments surrounding her targets. She observed the interactions between masters, overseers, servants, and neighbors, looking for cracks in alliances and moments of distraction. She understood that even a single overlooked routine or misplaced assumption could provide the opening she needed. By paying attention to the smallest details, she gained an awareness of the dynamics at play, allowing her to anticipate potential complications and adapt her plan accordingly. Her observations were not passive, they informed the sequencing of her actions, the selection of targets, and the strategies she would employ to neutralize threats while minimizing exposure. Her planning was meticulous, considering every possible scenario. She mapped routes for approach and escape, identified safe locations for concealment, and accounted for contingencies that could arise from unexpected interference. She envisioned the sequence in which the masters would be confronted, prioritizing those whose cruelty had caused the greatest suffering and whose elimination would create openings for subsequent action. Each step was deliberate, carefully constructed, and fully integrated into the larger strategy of revenge and family reunification. Even as she honed her plans, the psychological strain was immense. She confronted the moral weight of what she intended to do, understanding that every act of vengeance carried risk and consequence. She reconciled her determination with the necessity of her mission, convincing herself that the injustice inflicted upon her family justified the extreme measures she planned to take. This moral framework provided clarity, focus, and resolve, ensuring that doubt or fear would not compromise her actions. She became acutely aware that courage was not the absence of fear but the mastery of it, and she cultivated the mental strength necessary to act decisively under pressure. Her attention to timing was critical. She recognized that the effectiveness of her actions depended not only on precision, but also on the element of surprise. She calculated the moments when her targets would be least alert, the intervals in which guards might be distracted, and the opportunities that would allow her to strike without interference. These calculations were refined through repeated observation and mental rehearsal, allowing her to anticipate responses and adapt strategies in real time. She understood that success required both patience and decisiveness, the ability to wait for the exact moment and then act with unstoppable momentum. The woman's vigilance extended to contingency planning. She anticipated resistance, unexpected visitors, and environmental obstacles, preparing alternative routes, diversions, and fallback positions. She imagined potential confrontations, rehearsing responses until they became instinctual, and considered how to exploit opportunities created by chance or circumstance. Each mental rehearsal strengthened her readiness, building confidence that she could navigate the unpredictable nature of the task ahead, while maintaining control over both strategy and execution. Throughout her preparation, the memory of her family remained central. She visualized the reunion, imagining the moment when her children and husband would be restored to her care. This vision provided emotional sustenance, reinforcing the purpose behind every painstaking step, every observation, and every risk. It also reinforced her commitment to precision, ensuring that each action was purposeful and aligned with the ultimate objective of restoring her family and confronting those responsible for their suffering. By the time she was ready to act, the woman had become a figure of extraordinary determination. Her mind was a repository of strategy, her body honed for precision and endurance, and her spirit fortified by grief, love, and an unyielding commitment to justice. Every movement, observation, and decision had been calculated to maximize the chance of success, while minimizing exposure. She was prepared to confront the masters who had torn her family apart, to exploit their weaknesses, and to act decisively in the pursuit of vengeance and reunion. The meticulous preparation, combined with emotional intensity and mental acuity, had transformed her into a force capable of facing overwhelming odds with precision, courage, and relentless determination.
The woman's first move against the masters required a level of daring that most would have considered impossible. She understood that hesitation could cost her everything. Yet she also recognized that recklessness would be equally fatal. She had prepared herself for months, training her body, sharpening her mind, and studying the habits of those who had torn her family apart. Every observation, every routine memorized, and every detail catalogued in her mind was now ready to be put into action. She approached her first target with a calculated calm, each step measured, each breath controlled, and every movement designed to minimize noise and avoid detection. The anticipation of the confrontation sent a shiver through her, but it was tempered by the certainty that she had planned meticulously and that every contingency had been considered. As she neared the estate of her first target, she noticed the subtle indicators that confirmed her earlier observation. The guards followed their predictable path. The servants moved in their habitual rhythms, and the master himself was absorbed in trivial matters, unaware of the storm approaching. She crouched behind the undergrowth, her eyes fixed on the patterns she had memorized, and waited for the precise moment when her presence would remain unnoticed. Patience, she knew, was as vital as courage. She had rehearsed this moment countless times in her mind, visualizing the approach, the confrontation, and the escape. Now every detail fell into place with almost eerie precision. When the moment arrived, she moved with a fluidity that belied the tension coursing through her veins. Each step was silent, each movement deliberate, and every action executed with the precision of someone who had trained both mind and body to operate as one. She navigated the shadows, using the natural contours of the land and the obstacles in her path to conceal her approach. The master remained oblivious, consumed by his own sense of control and the assumption that no one would dare challenge him. This overconfidence was her ally, a weakness she had studied and was now ready to exploit. Her confrontation was swift and decisive. Years of observation and preparation coalesced in a single moment of action, allowing her to strike with accuracy and purpose. She moved with a calculated ferocity, neutralizing the threat quickly and efficiently, ensuring that the act served both justice and strategy. Every movement was purposeful, designed to achieve the maximum effect while minimizing risk to herself. She was aware of the consequences of failure, yet she also understood the necessity of acting decisively. The fear she had felt in the months leading up to this moment transformed into a focused intensity that guided every action. After the confrontation, she assessed the situation with the same meticulous attention she had used in preparation. She ensured that no trace of her presence remained, checked for signs of discovery, and confirmed that her plan could proceed uninterrupted. Every detail was scrutinized, every potential vulnerability addressed, and every precaution taken to safeguard the next step. She understood that the success of her mission depended not only on the elimination of the master but also on the ability to maintain control over the environment and prevent detection. Her meticulous attention to detail ensured that each action reinforced the overall strategy, creating a cascade of consequences that would ultimately benefit her ultimate goal. As she moved away from the scene, she allowed herself a moment to reflect on the magnitude of what she had accomplished. The first master had been confronted and neutralized, a testament to the months of preparation, observation, and mental rehearsal that had brought her to this point. Yet she knew that this was only the beginning. Each subsequent target would present unique challenges, requiring the same combination of patience, precision, and calculated audacity. She reminded herself that the stakes were nothing less than the restoration of her family and the delivery of justice to those who had inflicted unimaginable suffering. Her actions also had an immediate psychological effect. Though unseen, the ripple of fear and uncertainty began to spread among the remaining masters. Their sense of invulnerability had been shattered, replaced by an uneasy awareness that someone had penetrated their defenses and acted with precision and determination. This shift in perception worked to her advantage, creating opportunities that she could exploit in the confrontations to come. She recognized that strategy extended beyond physical action, encompassing the psychological impact her deeds could have on those who had underestimated her. By destabilizing their confidence and sense of control, She increased the likelihood that subsequent actions would proceed with reduced resistance. Throughout the process, her thoughts remained firmly anchored in her family. Every act of confrontation, every risk undertaken was a step toward reuniting the children and her husband, toward restoring the bonds that had been violently severed. She visualized the moment of reunion with intense clarity, allowing the image to guide her decisions, strengthen her resolve, and sustain her through the tension and danger of each confrontation. The memory of their faces, their voices, and the warmth of their presence became both shield and compass, helping her navigate the perilous path she had chosen. Her careful planning also involved contingencies for escape and concealment. She had prepared multiple routes to retreat, safe locations to hide if discovered, and strategies to mislead pursuers. Every possible obstacle had been considered, every variable accounted for, and every risk mitigated through foresight and preparation. This level of planning allowed her to act with confidence, knowing that even if unexpected complications arose, she could adapt and maintain control over the unfolding situation. Her ability to anticipate and respond to dynamic circumstances became a critical element of her success. The intensity of the confrontation and the execution of her plan required both physical endurance and mental fortitude. She remained acutely aware of the dangers inherent in each step, understanding that a single mistake could jeopardize not only her life but also the mission to reunite her family. Yet she drew strength from the months of preparation, the clarity of her objectives, and the unshakable bond of love that connected her to those who had been taken from her. This combination of preparation, courage, and emotional intensity allowed her to act decisively, transforming fear into focused action and uncertainty into controlled strategy. As the night progressed, she reflected on the pattern that had begun to emerge. Each confrontation reinforced the efficacy of her preparation and the importance of precision in execution. She recognized that the approach she had used against the first master could be adapted for others, with adjustments made to account for individual differences and environmental variables. This adaptability became a key strength, allowing her to maintain momentum while confronting multiple targets and ensuring that each action contributed to the broader objective of family reunification. Even in moments of solitude after the immediate dangers had passed, she remained vigilant. She reviewed each action in her mind, evaluating its effectiveness, identifying lessons learned, and refining strategies for future confrontation. This continuous process of assessment and adjustment ensured that she remained one step ahead of those who had sought to harm her family, reinforcing the meticulous, methodical approach that had carried her this far. Through the combination of observation, planning, psychological insight, and physical precision, she had begun to dismantle the network of power that had torn her family apart. The first confrontation was not merely an act of vengeance. It was the opening move in a carefully orchestrated campaign to reclaim her family, restore justice, and confront the cruelty that had been inflicted upon them. Her actions set the tone for what was to come, demonstrating both her capability and her determination, and signaling that those who had underestimated her would face consequences that could not be ignored. After the successful confrontation of her first target, the woman felt a surge of both relief and determination. The initial act had been meticulously planned, executed with precision, and carried out under immense pressure, yet it had proven that her strategy was sound and that her months of preparation had not been in vain. The psychological weight of what she had done was significant. For the first time since her family had been torn apart, she felt a measure of control over her circumstance. The fear, despair, and helplessness that had haunted her since that fateful Christmas Eve had been replaced, at least temporarily, by a sense of empowerment. She understood, however, that this was only the beginning, and that each subsequent master presented unique challenges that would require equal if not greater focus, cunning, and courage. Her next target was a man whose cruelty had been particularly severe. Unlike the first, he was known for his vigilance and suspicion, traits that would make direct confrontation far more dangerous. She spent days observing him from a distance, noting every nuance of his routine, the times he left his home, the patterns of his guard patrols, the times when his attention was divided or distracted by trivial matters. She recorded these details in her mind, committing to memory even the smallest shifts in behavior that might indicate an opportunity. The subtleties she observed, how he gestured when irritated, the rhythm of his footsteps, the way he responded to minor disturbances, offered insight into his temperament and vulnerabilities, and she began to formulate a plan that accounted for every variable. Her approach was both patient and methodical. She understood that impatience could lead to mistakes, mistakes could lead to failure, and failure could mean permanent separation from her family. Each day was spent refining her observations, imagining scenarios and mentally rehearsing the sequence of actions that would allow her to neutralize this master without alerting others. She considered the timing of each step, the positioning of herself and potential obstacles, and the psychological state of the target. She analyzed the environment in minute detail, the layout of rooms, the location of guards,
the lighting at different times of day, and the potential escape routes should the plan falter. Every element of the plan was subjected to scrutiny, tested mentally and adjusted until it achieved a level of precision she deemed sufficient to act. The psychological dimension of her strategy was as critical as the physical. She recognized that fear, hesitation and overconfidence were tools she could exploit. The master's own arrogance, a product of years of unquestioned authority, made him underestimate the possibility of a threat. By remaining unseen and striking when least expected, she could destabilize his confidence and diminish his ability to respond effectively. She practiced patience, learning to wait for the precise moment when his vigilance would falter, when his attention would waver, and when the conditions were most favorable for her action. She became attuned to the subtle signs of distraction and vulnerability, reading gestures, expressions and tones of voice with the same acuity as a seasoned strategist. Physical preparation was ongoing and rigorous. She honed her strength, agility and endurance, ensuring that she could move swiftly and silently across varied terrain. She practiced scaling walls, slipping through narrow passages, and moving without producing a sound. Every movement was rehearsed until it became instinctual, so that when the moment of confrontation arrived, her body would act without hesitation or error. She knew that her success depended on the integration of mind and body, on the ability to combine mental clarity with physical precision, and she trained tirelessly to achieve that level of harmony. The woman's emotional landscape remained intense and deeply personal. Every thought of action was intertwined with the memory of her family, the children she had held, the husband whose presence had been ripped from her, and the bonds of love that had been violently severed. These memories, while painful, fueled her determination, providing motivation and a moral compass that guided her through the perilous tasks she undertook. She allowed grief to sharpen her awareness, sorrow to heighten her senses, and love to reinforce her unwavering commitment. In this way, emotion was transformed into strategy, anguish into focus, and passion into calculated action. Her observations revealed vulnerabilities that could be exploited with careful planning. She noticed, for example, that the master had a habit of checking his property in a predictable sequence, leaving certain areas unattended for brief intervals. Guards were stationed in fixed positions that allowed for small blind spots, and the master's attention to detail was uneven, influenced by mood and distraction. She cataloged these details, mentally constructing the most efficient path to achieve her goal while minimizing exposure. She also considered secondary factors, such as the behavior of nearby residents, potential witnesses, and environmental conditions that might affect her approach. Every contingency was planned for, every scenario rehearsed, and every possibility accounted for in her mental blueprint. The element of surprise remained central to her strategy. She understood that the master's sense of security and his assumption of control could be turned against him. By remaining unseen, observing patiently and striking at the precise moment, she could destabilize him, creating confusion and fear that would prevent effective resistance. Her approach combined stealth, psychological manipulation and precise action, ensuring that each step was purposeful, and that each consequence contributed to the larger objective of family reunification. Her plans were tested mentally before action was ever taken. She ran through countless scenarios, imagining obstacles, resistance, and potential distractions. Each mental rehearsal strengthened her confidence, sharpened her decision-making and refined her time. She anticipated how the master might react under stress, how guards might respond, and how environmental factors could influence the outcome. These rehearsals allowed her to act decisively when the moment arrived, minimizing hesitation and maximizing the effectiveness of each action. The emotional intensity of her mission never wavered. Every day spent observing, rehearsing and planning reinforced the urgency of her goal and the stakes involved. The thought of her family, separated in suffering, was a constant reminder that failure was not an option. This focus allowed her to endure the isolation, the tension and the mental strain of preparing to confront a powerful adversary. It also reinforced her commitment to precision, strategy and the careful sequencing of actions that would ensure success. When the time finally came to act, she moved with a combination of calculated audacity and careful restraint. Each step had been rehearsed, every movement designed to exploit the master's vulnerabilities while maintaining concealment. She struck with precision, neutralizing the target efficiently and decisively, ensuring that the act fulfilled both strategic and emotional objectives. The psychological impact was immediate. Even the distant network of those who remained aware of the situation began to feel a subtle but growing unease. Confidence that had long protected cruelty was replaced by apprehension, uncertainty and fear, creating a ripple effect that would make subsequent actions more achievable. Afterward, she retreated with the same meticulous attention to detail that had characterized her approach. She ensured that no evidence linked her to the confrontation, checked escape routes, and assessed the surroundings for any unforeseen risks. Her planning allowed her to move from one location to another with confidence, maintaining control over the situation and reinforcing her strategic advantage. Each successful action not only removed a source of cruelty from her family's path, but also strengthened her resolve and reinforced the feasibility of completing the mission in its entirety. Through careful observation, patient preparation, and precise execution, the woman had begun to dismantle the network of power that had separated her family. Her actions were a combination of intellect, courage, and emotional intensity, a testament to the extraordinary determination that grief, love, and injustice could inspire. The successful confrontation of this second master was not merely an act of vengeance, it was a strategic milestone, bringing her closer to the ultimate goal of reuniting her family and ensuring that those who had inflicted suffering would face consequences for their cruelty. The success of her first two confrontations gave the woman both confidence and clarity, yet she knew that the challenges ahead would be increasingly perilous. Each master she intended to confront possessed unique strength, vigilance, and social influence, and any lapse in preparation or execution could be fatal. She understood that she could not rely solely on courage or brute force. Her intellect, precision, and meticulous observation had to guide every step. The memory of her family, her children and husband remained the driving force behind every decision, every movement, and every act of calculated courage. She allowed the anguish of separation to sharpen her focus, transforming grief into a weapon and love into a compass that directed her actions with unwavering certainty. Her next target was particularly notorious for cruelty and suspicion, a man whose arrogance was matched only by his ruthlessness. She spent days observing him from concealed vantage points, noting subtle patterns in his daily routines, the placement and timing of his guards, and the habits of his household staff. She studied the rhythm of his movements, the tone of his voice during conversation, and the micro-expressions that revealed distraction or vulnerability. Every detail became a critical piece of intelligence, forming the foundation of a strategy that required not only careful timing but also adaptability. She understood that even the smallest miscalculation could expose her, compromise her mission, and put her family further at risk. The woman's approach was methodical and deliberate. She mapped the terrain in her mind, visualizing paths of approach and retreat, noting shadows, fences, doors, and windows, as well as any natural features that could aid concealment. She rehearsed each movement mentally, imagining potential obstacles, disruptions, or unexpected arrivals, and developing contingency plans for every scenario. These mental exercises strengthened her readiness, ensuring that when she moved into action, each decision and movement would be precise, purposeful, and coordinated with the ultimate objective of neutralizing the target without drawing attention. Observation alone was insufficient. She had to understand the psychological dimensions of her target. The master's confidence in his own control created blind spots, assumptions that she could exploit. She watched how he interacted with his guards, noting the instances when authority or arrogance distracted him from danger. She considered how fear, confusion, and uncertainty could be used as tools to destabilize him, reducing the effectiveness of his defenses and increasing the likelihood of a successful confrontation. Each rehearsal in her mind included not only physical movements, but also the manipulation of psychological pressure, ensuring that the target's own habits and vulnerabilities could be leveraged to her advantage. Her physical preparation remained rigorous. Months of stealth practice, agility training, and endurance exercises had conditioned her body to act efficiently under pressure. She moved silently, navigated challenging terrain with agility, and maintained stamina for prolonged periods of concentration and exertion. Every movement had been rehearsed to the point of instinct, allowing her to act decisively without hesitation. Her body had become a finely tuned instrument, ready to execute the plan with precision, even under the intense stress of confrontation and the ever-present threat of detection. Emotional fortitude was equally critical. The memory of her family's suffering, the trauma of the separation, and the love she held for them were constant companions that fueled her resolve. These emotions, while intense, were harnessed strategically, giving her the drive to endure long hours of observation, the patience to wait for the perfect moment, and the courage to act decisively when opportunity arose. Grief was transformed into vigilance, sorrow into determination, and love into an unshakable guiding force, ensuring that her actions were purposeful and aligned with the ultimate goal of reunification and justice. Every detail of the master's environment was scrutinized. She observed the guards' routines, the habits of household staff, and the timing of deliveries and visitors. She catalogued potential risks, noting how external factors, weather, neighbors, or unforeseen events, might affect her plan. Every contingency was considered and multiple options were developed for approach, confrontation, and retreat. This level of preparation allowed her to maintain control over dynamic situations, adapt to unexpected challenges, and act with confidence, even when conditions shifted unpredictably. The element of surprise remained central to her strategy. She understood that even the most formidable adversary could be destabilized by unexpected action, especially when combined with careful timing, manipulation of environment and exploitation of psychological vulnerabilities. She used stealth to approach undetected, patience to wait for the precise moment, and calculated force to neutralize the threat swiftly. Each action was designed to achieve maximum effect with minimal exposure, ensuring that the mission progressed efficiently while maintaining safety for herself and ultimately for her family. Her planning extended to escape routes and fallback positions. She identified safe locations, secondary paths, and alternative strategies to mitigate unforeseen complications. Every scenario was visualized in her mind, from ideal execution to the most challenging contingencies, reinforcing her readiness and confidence. She understood that adaptability and foresight were as critical as courage and skill, and she committed herself to thinking several steps ahead in every action she undertook. The psychological impact of each confrontation on the remaining masters was also a strategic consideration. Her prior successes began to unsettle the network of power she opposed. Confidence and complacency among the remaining masters were replaced with apprehension, uncertainty, and suspicion. This shift in perception, though subtle, created openings that could be exploited in subsequent confrontation. By destabilizing the authority and morale of her adversaries, she increased her chances of success while reducing the risk of direct resistance. Her approach was not merely about physical confrontation, it was an exercise in strategy, manipulation, and psychological influence. Her mental rehearsals were exhaustive. She anticipated how the master might respond under stress, how guards could react, and how environmental factors could influence outcomes. These rehearsals allowed her to act decisively, with confidence in her ability to adapt to changing circumstances. She practiced visualizing both success and potential obstacles, refining each scenario until her responses became instinctive. By internalizing every possibility, she minimized hesitation and ensured that her actions would be precise, deliberate, and effective. When the moment of confrontation arrived, the woman executed her plan with unwavering focus. Each movement was deliberate, every step measured, and every decision informed by months of observation and preparation. The target's vulnerabilities, identified through careful study, were exploited with precision, and the act was carried out efficiently and decisively. The psychological effect was immediate, as the master's sense of control and authority was disrupted, creating a ripple of fear and uncertainty that extended beyond the immediate scene. Her actions served both strategic and emotional purposes, reinforcing her confidence and advancing the overarching goal of family reunification. After the confrontation, she moved with the same meticulous attention to detail that had characterized her preparation. She ensured no trace of her presence remained, confirmed that her escape routes were secure, and assessed the environment for any unforeseen risks. Each successful action reinforced her belief in the efficacy of her strategy and strengthened her determination to continue. She understood that these careful, methodical steps were critical to dismantling the network of power that had separated her family and to ultimately restoring what had been stolen from them. Through observation, preparation, and decisive action, the woman continued to dismantle the system of cruelty that had torn her family apart. Each confrontation tested her courage, skill, and mental acuity, yet reinforced the principles that guided her: patience, precision, adaptability, and unyielding resolve. Her actions were both strategic and deeply personal, a manifestation of the love, grief, and determination that had sustained her through the long months since her family's separation. With every step she moved closer to her ultimate goal, systematically confronting those who had caused unimaginable suffering and reclaiming the power that had been unjustly taken.
The final confrontation demanded a level of courage, precision, and psychological acuity that surpassed all previous efforts. The last master represented not only the culmination of her plan but also the greatest threat to her mission, and, by extension, the safety and reunification of her family. He was known for his cunning, his vigilance, and his cruelty. A man whose authority had gone largely unchallenged, and whose arrogance was reinforced by years of unquestioned dominance. She understood that approaching him required a synthesis of everything she had learned: stealth, observation, timing, physical mastery, and the careful manipulation of psychological pressure. Failure was not an option. Success would secure both her family and the final reckoning against those who had inflicted immeasurable suffering. She spent days meticulously observing the master's routines, noting even the most subtle patterns: the timing of his meals, the rotations of his guards, the placement of lights in the house, and the habits of his household staff were all recorded mentally with painstaking care. She catalogued the times when his attention lapsed, the moments when he was most distracted, and the intervals in which his confidence made him vulnerable. Every piece of information became a critical component of her strategy, allowing her to construct a plan that minimized risk and maximized the likelihood of success. This observation phase was exhaustive, for she knew that even a single miscalculation could render all her prior efforts futile. Her mental preparation was equally exhaustive. She ran through every possible scenario, anticipating not only the actions of the master himself but also the responses of guards, servants, and any potential witnesses. She visualized obstacles, missteps, and sudden complications, rehearsing contingencies until her reactions became instinctive. Each scenario was analyzed, refined, and mentally tested, ensuring that her mind would remain calm, precise, and adaptive in the midst of action. The repetition of these mental exercises gave her confidence and clarity, allowing her to approach the final confrontation with a combination of patience, focus, and calculated audacity that had been honed over months of preparation. Physical readiness was at its peak. Months of endurance, agility, and stealth training had conditioned her body to move silently, react instantly, and sustain effort under the extreme tension of confrontation. Every step, leap, and maneuver had been rehearsed until it became automatic, allowing her to act decisively without hesitation or error. She was aware that the final target was more alert, more capable, and more dangerous than any she had faced before, and she trusted that her body, trained to respond in harmony with her mind, would execute each action with precision. Her strength, agility, and stamina were critical elements of a plan that required both patience and sudden, decisive action. Emotional discipline remained a key factor. Her grief, anger, and love for her family were channeled into focused determination rather than uncontrolled passion. She allowed the memory of her children and husband to guide her, sustaining her through the tension, isolation, and mental strain of preparation. Every emotion was harnessed strategically, reinforcing vigilance, enhancing awareness, and sharpening resolve. The stakes were personal, immediate, and profound, and this emotional intensity became a driving force that aligned seamlessly with the precision of her strategy. The psychological aspects of the confrontation were central to her plan. She understood that the master's arrogance and overconfidence were vulnerabilities that could be exploited. By striking unexpectedly, maintaining control over her own presence, and manipulating the environment to create uncertainty, she could destabilize him, diminish his capacity for effective resistance, and reduce the risk to herself. Each action was designed not only to neutralize physical threats but also to create confusion, fear, and hesitation, thereby maximizing the strategic advantage. Her prior experiences with other masters had reinforced the importance of psychological leverage, and she applied these lessons rigorously in her approach to the final confrontation. Her reconnaissance extended to escape routes, secondary positions, and potential hideout. She mapped each path, taking into account timing, visibility, and potential obstacles, ensuring that no element of her plan was left to chance. Contingencies were meticulously prepared. In the event of interference, unexpected visitors, or environmental complications, alternative strategies were ready to be executed immediately. This attention to detail allowed her to maintain control over a dynamic and unpredictable situation, reinforcing her confidence and providing a safety net should conditions deviate from expectation. The moment of action required the precise integration of all elements of her preparation. Stealth, timing, psychological pressure, and physical precision converged in a single fluid sequence. She moved silently through shadows, guided by months of observation, her body attuned to the terrain and every subtle cue in the environment. She approached the master at a moment when his attention was divided, his defenses relaxed by routine, and his confidence blind to the imminent threat. Every step, gesture, and movement was calibrated to exploit these vulnerabilities, ensuring that her actions would achieve maximum effect with minimal exposure. The confrontation itself was swift, precise, and decisive. The culmination of months of planning, training, and observation allowed her to neutralize the master efficiently. She applied both physical and psychological strategies, combining sudden action with manipulation of his assumptions and expectations. The act was deliberate, calculated, and executed with the clarity and purpose that had guided her from the very beginning. The master, unprepared for such an unexpected and expertly executed intervention, was unable to mount effective resistance, and the balance of power shifted decisively in her favor. After the confrontation, she executed her retreat with the same meticulous attention to detail that had characterized every prior step of her plan. She retraced escape routes, checked for signs of pursuit or discovery, and ensured that no trace of her presence remained. Each action reinforced the security of the mission, maintained control over the environment, and preserved the integrity of the broader objective, the safe reunion of her family.
This careful execution of both action and aftermath reflected her understanding that every step, no matter how small, contributed to the ultimate goal. The psychological ripple effect of the final act was profound. The network of remaining masters, already destabilized by previous confrontations, experienced heightened fear, uncertainty and suspicion. The perception of invulnerability had been shattered, and the consequences of underestimating her determination became vividly clear. This destabilization further secured the path to reuniting her family, reducing resistance and reinforcing the efficacy of the careful, methodical approach she had employed throughout her campaign. Her mind remained focused on the ultimate objective. Every act of confrontation, every risk undertaken, and every tactical maneuver had been executed in service of a single purpose: to restore her family, deliver justice to those who had caused suffering, and reclaim the bonds that had been violently severed. This clarity of purpose guided her actions, reinforced her resolve, and ensured that even in moments of extreme tension, hesitation or doubt, did not compromise the mission. Her strategic, emotional and physical preparation converged seamlessly in this final confrontation, reflecting the culmination of months of relentless effort, meticulous planning and unwavering determination. Through observation, preparation, psychological acuity, physical precision, and emotional discipline, the woman had dismantled the network of cruelty that had torn her family apart. Each confrontation had built upon the lessons of the last, culminating in the successful neutralization of the final master. The months of vigilance, mental rehearsal and preparation had paid off, allowing her to act decisively, maintain control over every variable, and secure the conditions necessary for the long-awaited reunion. Her actions were a testament to courage, strategy, and the extraordinary determination that grief, love and injustice can inspire, and they marked the penultimate step in reclaiming what had been unjustly taken from her and her family. The night after the final confrontation, a profound stillness settled over the land. The woman moved with deliberate care, retracing her steps through shadowed paths, ensuring that no trace of her presence remained. The fear and chaos she had sown among the masters and their guards now worked in her favor, leaving open corridors through which she could move with relative freedom. Her mind, sharp and disciplined, remained focused on the singular goal that had guided every risk, every calculation and every act of courage: the safe reunion of her family. Every heartbeat, every quiet breath, carried the weight of anticipation and the hope that had sustained her through months of danger, grief, and unrelenting preparation. As she approached the hiding place where her children had been kept, a tremor of both fear and exhilaration coursed through. Years of separation, endless nights haunted by their absence, and the cruelty of those who had torn them away, all of it coalesced into a moment that was at once terrifying and redemptive. She slowed her steps, listening intently for any sign of disturbance, any sound that might indicate danger, and yet her heart raced with the knowledge that the reunion was imminent. In that instant, the months of preparation, the meticulous observations, and the courage that had carried her through every confrontation seemed to converge into a single, crystallized purpose. Then she saw them, her children, wide-eyed and weary, yet alive. The sight struck her with a force that was almost overwhelming. The years of anguish and uncertainty gave way to a surge of relief, joy and uncontainable love. She rushed forward, gathering them in her arms, feeling the warmth of their bodies and the tangible proof that they had survived. The embrace was fierce and protective, a silent vow that no cruelty would separate them again. The children clung to her, sensing the triumph and safety that had finally arrived, their small bodies trembling with a mix of exhaustion and elation. Her husband appeared shortly after, drawn by the same signs, by the whispers of hope that had been carried through the tense nights. The reunion was complete. Every member of the family, once torn apart, now together again. The air seemed to shimmer with the weight of justice served, and the triumph of perseverance over cruelty. Tears flowed freely, not merely of relief but of vindication. Sorrow transformed into elation, and grief transformed into celebration. The ordeal had been harrowing, yet the determination, strategy and courage that had guided the woman had prevailed against insurmountable odds. In the days that followed, the landscape itself seemed to echo the masters who had survived the confrontations were left to reckon with fear, uncertainty and the knowledge that the quiet, determined force they had underestimated had dismantled the network of cruelty they had relied upon. Power, long assumed unassailable, had been challenged and broken, and the consequences of their tyranny were laid bare. Meanwhile, the woman and her family began to reclaim not only their physical freedom, but the sense of safety, belonging, and dignity that had been denied to them for so long. The triumph was both personal and symbolic. She had not only reunited her family but had asserted the extraordinary power of courage, intellect and relentless determination in the face of injustice. Every risk she had taken, every step she had planned, and every act of bravery had contributed to a larger truth, that love and resolve could dismantle cruelty. that careful strategy could overcome brute force, and that the human spirit, when guided by purpose, could triumph even in the darkest of circumstances. Her family, once fractured and hidden in despair, now stood together as a testament to endurance, hope and justice. The horrors of the past, the separation and the cruelty they had endured remained a part of their story, yet they had been transformed into a narrative of resilience and triumph. The woman, whose courage had orchestrated this reunion, embodied the relentless pursuit of justice, proving that a single determined individual, armed with strategy, patience and love, could overcome even the most entrenched systems of oppression. As they walked together into the dawn, the world seemed to hold its breath, witnessing the quiet yet profound victory. Their steps, once tentative and weighed with fear, now carried confidence, relief and the quiet dignity of those who had survived, persevered, and reclaimed what was theirs. Every shadow that had concealed danger, every obstacle that had tested resolve, had been overcome through intelligence, courage, and unwavering determination. The family's reunion was more than the return of lost members. It was the restoration of hope, the assertion of justice, and the affirmation of the enduring strength of love in the face of unimaginable cruelty.